All right, welcome back. So now progression training. And this skill is one of the skills that a lot of people covet the most. The ability to hear a chord progression and tell exactly what it is. But we don't just arrive at that skill. All the other previous levels that we've gone through before, we're building on those levels. We need all of those skills to be able to then figure out a chord progression. So let's take a look at chord progression or progression training. Once I click on that, it takes me to our settings screen. And you see where it says root note and C. Here you can basically decide what key you want the progression to be done in. Not that it really matters because we're only doing this by ear, but if you want, you can change it right here to whichever key you want. I can see one of the reasons we decide to add keys is because after a while doing everything in the key of C, it gets a little bit easy because your ear starts to recognize that root note, C, C. So to shake that up a bit, you might want to change the root note to see if you were just relying on memorization because everything is C, or were you actually using the techniques explained. And one way of testing that is changing the root note for the chord. So that's what that does. Now, down below, you see where it says tonality. Tonality has to do with whether it's major key or minor key. Because as you know, progressions are not only in major key. We have minor keys. And you want to be able to identify progressions based on the key. Now, this is tricky because now we have to know the makeup of the different scale. Let's quickly talk about that for reference. And again, if you need more tutorials that goes deeper into these things, pianistwithwarren.com already has a lot of these courses. But let's take a look at the makeup of the major key. This is what we call the diatonic chords of the key. The 1, the 4, and the 5 are major chords. So once you hear 1, 4, 5, you know it's in the major key. The 2nd, the 3, and the 6 are minor chords, and the 7 is diminished. That is the diatonic makeup of the chords, right? So when you're listening to the progression, what you're listening for is the relationship major versus minor, because that's what's going to establish the tonality. We also give you a reference note, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. The minor key now, first of all, this is based on the harmonic minor scale. So, because there are 3 types of minor scale: harmonic minor, natural minor, and melodic minor. The progressions outlined in the app are based on the harmonic minor scale. So the 1 is minor, the 2 is diminished, the 3 is major, the 4 is minor, the 5 is major, the 6 is major, and the 7 is diminished. If this is not something you know intuitively, you have to practice it before you can attempt progressions in minor keys, because this is what you're going to need to help you. And let me give you some demonstration. But first, let's actually complete the rest of the settings customization options. Chord quality is where you can determine the type of chords you want to be quizzed. So right now, it just selects major and minor. But if you want to add major, minor, and diminished, which is all the chords that you'd need to encounter in the major key. But if you want to add other chords to it, suspension, augmented chords, major 7th, minor 7th, and so on, you can do that. I recommend just going with the default options first and try to see if you can score 12 out of 12 multiple times in a row before starting to add more chords, right? Because we want to do this thing systematically. Below chord quality, we have chord count, which is similar to baseline training. You can decide how many chords you want to be in your progression, and you have from 3 up to 6. So you can have a 6 progression sequence, or you can start with 2 or 3. The default is 3. Question and speed, timer, multiple attempts is the same thing as we've covered before. Here's a new one we haven't encountered before, and it's hide reference note. And let's give you a sneak peek of what before I talk about that. So you see where it says 4 in the box? That's the reference chord. So it's telling you that your first chord is going to be a 4. Right? Now, how do you know if it's major or minor tonality? If the 4 is a major chord, then you know you're in a major tonality, because the 4 chord in a minor key is minor. So you see how you're using your understanding of theory to help you figure it out? So hide reference note simply means removing that 4. So if I come here, back to settings and click hide reference note, exit, now just give me 3 empty boxes and I have to figure out what chords I'm hearing. Now, I would recommend hiding the reference note only if you know exactly what tonality you're in. Because if you have multiple tonalities selected, you can't really tell what your first chord is. But if you know you're only working with the major tonality, then you should know what your first chord is using the other 2 chords as reference. Now I'm going to demonstrate both options for you. But first, let's add back that reference note. So I'm going to listen. So let's talk about the process of how you begin to figure this out. So first thing I identify is the qualities of the chord. The first chord is the 4, so we know it's major. And in the settings, I can see that my chord quality, my tonality is set to major. So I don't have to worry about minor keys. So my first chord is major. Second chord is major. Third chord is minor. Now we're going to do some deductive reasoning. We know that in a major key, the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord are major. So if I'm given my first chord, which is the major, and my second chord is a major, and it's not the repeated chord, then I know there are 2 options. Either it's going to be the 5 or it's going to be the 1. Listen to the distance the chord moves between the first chord and the second chord. I can hear that the chord moved down and the distance sound a little further. So that tells me it's not the 5, because the 5 is right beside the 4. If it was the 5, I would have most likely heard the chord progression go up, and it would be a very short distance. So without even have to sing intervals and all of that, I was able to deduce that it moved from a 4 to a 1. Now, what is that third chord? Pa, pa, pa. So what I'm singing is the root of the chords. Pa, pa, pa. What's the distance between pa, 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 pa? You see, I'm using my understanding of the major scales and intervals to figure out the next chord. I could tell it's minor, and I could tell it moved a distance of a 3, and it moved up. From 1, moved up to a minor. It's not the 2, so it has to be the 3. And there you go. 4, 1, 3 progression. So this is how you figure out chord progressions. You use deductive reasoning. And you use all the skills that you've completed before. Your understanding of pitch recognition, interval recognition, chord quality identification, your makeup of the major scale, the diatonic chords of the major scale. And like I said, if you don't know these things already, I have a course that I call the Beginner's Guide that outlines a lot of this, what we call fundamental stuff. Because ear training is absolutely tied to your understanding of theory. And the more theory knowledge you have, you can use that to your advantage to deduce what you're hearing. So hearing is not, again, this special thing that lives in the stratosphere that you either magically wake up one day or have it, or you were born with it or something like that. No. There's a process, and you can deduce it. Let's try another one. My first chord is 2. So what does that tell you? The 2 chord is minor in the major key. Minor, major, diminish. First thing I did, I identified the quality of each chord. See why chord quality recognition is important? So I heard minor, major, and diminish. Now, as we know, there's only one chord in the scale that is diminished in its diatonic form, and that is the 7. So even without doing anything else, we know the last chord is a 7. So all we have to do is figure out the middle chord. Minor, major. Now we know that there's 3 major chords in the major key, the 1, the 4, and the 5. So what we're going to listen for now is the distance the chord moved from the 2 to where did it go? Listen to the direction. So I heard ba, da, the chord moved down. And it moved down pretty closely. Da, da, the distance, and you can sing it, feel it in your vocal cord, that the distance that it moved was basically beside each other. Da, da. So that tells me now that the chord is major, it moved down, so the only other major chord that is that close to chord 2 is the 1 chord. So if we put 1 right here, we should get it absolutely correct. And this is how you get to understand progression training. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at chord inversions.